This young Australian will earn over $10 million in the next 4 years. He's not a lottery winner, nor a highly successful young businessman, but a sportsman. In fact, Australia's highest paid team sportsman. His name is Luc Longley.
The manufacturer of the base out of Greenville, South Carolina, on all airports.
This is the tall tale of how Australian basketball produced its first big-time professional player. And while it's Luc's story of personal commitment and perseverance, it's also a reflection on the spectacular growth of basketball in Australia and the emergence of homegrown superstars. There is a dream for all basketballers. That dream is spelt with 3 letters, NBA, the National Basketball Association of America.
Scottie Pippen with the lead for Michael Jordan.
More often than not, the professional basketball success stories emerge from a few gritty urban neighbourhoods. Hungry ambition to be a celebrity athlete, performing in front of adoring crowds. From playgrounds in New York's Harlem, west to Watts in LA, the talk is the same. To play with Michael Jordan and to fly free, floating above all earthly concerns. Despite several concentrated attempts, Australia has never had an NBA player. The NBA is huge crowds, superb athletes, fast pace, American razzmatazz. After all, the people who run the game realised a long time ago that this was more than a sport. NBA is entertainment, showbiz. Luc Longley is joining one of the greatest shows on earth. Luc comes from Fremantle in Western Australia, and if you haven't noticed, he's tall. In fact, very tall. 7 feet 2 inches tall, to be precise. However, there's nothing frightening about this giant. His friends know him as a warm, intelligent and complex individual, a non-conformist in a sporting world that demands conformity. And while Luc will be the first to play in the NBA, 4 other Australians have tried to crash into this elite league. This is also their story. Eddie Palabinskas, the pioneer of the 70s, a cocky, pure shooter, driven by self-confidence and a professional sports dream. Andrew Gaze, the first national identity and genuine homegrown superstar. Andrew Vlahov, one of 3 emerging stars set to propel Australian basketball through the 90s. Mark Bradtke, the second of that new breed, another athletic giant blessed with speed and agility. And Luc, the young Aussie whose combination of brain, brawn and determination have enabled him to push down the final NBA barrier. Kalabinskas, Gaze, Vlahov, Bradtke and Longley all have taken the NBA dream one step further. But for Luc, it's a reality. This is the famous Madison Square Garden, New York. The NBA is about to conduct its annual player draft. It could only happen in America. 8,000 sports-crazy New Yorkers attend, and one very nervous young Australian is about to be a big part of it. Given the American passion for all sports, and particularly college and pro basketball, the event is covered on national television. Analysts and experts dissect each move and counter-move. Here's how they saw Australia's big moment.
All right, let's go to David Stern right now.
With the 7th pick in the 1991 NBA draft, the Minnesota Timberwolves select Luc Longley from the University of New Mexico.
Well, David Stern got by the toughest part of the draft for him. Last year, he mentioned the Minnesota North Stars had the basketball player going to the Hockey League. Luc Longley. That Luc belongs to Lucian James Longley. His father, Richard, played Australian rules football. His father's 6'9", his mother is 6'3". He went to Scotch College in Perth, Australia, prior to coming to New Mexico. 7'1½", 270 pounds, but in case you're Australian, that's 2.06 meters, 125 kilos.
As the 7th pick, Luc became an instant millionaire. With the announcement of his name, he'd found out which city would be his home and which team he would be expected to play his heart out for. There were standard Crocodile Dundee questions, and yes, we Australians do play basketball. However, you can be sure the Minnesota people didn't select Longley for novelty value. They don't pay you millions to listen to a funny accent.
But it feels awesome. You know, the emotions, I mean, it's electric here. It's hard to put into words. It's just very satisfying.
Sitting atop a plateau some 5,280 feet in the air is Albuquerque, New Mexico. Until recently, most Australians had never heard of Luc Longley. That's not surprising, as Luc has been a resident of Albuquerque for the last 5 years. Luc was spotted in Perth and offered a full athletic scholarship to the University of New Mexico. Albuquerque does not have any pro sports teams, and the college games are the biggest shows in town. The team plays in the Pit, an extraordinary facility that seats 18,000 fans. And while the Lobos had never been a national power, it hadn't been from lack of local support. 1987, and enter a gangly tangle of arms and legs in the form of a 17-year-old Luc Longley. Luc didn't exactly set the local community on fire with his first impromptu press conference.
Well, I suppose I'm just lazy. No, I think it's a lot to do with fitness. We didn't have a very good team attitude that game. We didn't play very well. I think the altitude also is a bit of a difference for me. I sucking wind a lot.
I remember the first day of practice, his freshman year. You know, he was a big, tall, skinny kid, weighed a lot less than he did now. And you know, the press were kind of huddled around, taking a look at him, looking him over, and you know, I don't think anybody realized what a talent he really was at that point. And in fact, he was kind of dragging in practice that day, and we were talking to him after practice, and he says, "Hey, mate, I'm just plain lazy." And so that was the talk around town. You know, here we got a 7'2" kid who's lazy, but boy, he sure proved a lot of people wrong.
Also joining the team in '87 was a long bombing local, ROB-ROBBINS. He and Luc would become great friends.
Stops, pops, and gets it.
He was the biggest person I've ever seen in my life, but probably the most athletic. I thought he was going to be all gangly, couldn't walk, couldn't be, you know. But he was incredibly agile, but he had a little baby face. You could tell he had a lot to learn, a lot of things that he needed to get done. He's probably the most mature person as an athlete that I'd ever met. most Americans, all they worried about was basketball, but he had more of a life background. He knew how to treat people. He knew how to conversate with people. He was just a person.
Also teaming up with Luke in his first or freshman year was former Canberra Cannon Charlie Thomas. He was one of the team's senior statesmen.
When Luke first came to the University of New Mexico, he was very timid, very self-conscious about his game. He didn't want to hurt anybody. He was too nice. He would give you an elbow and turn around and say, "I'm sorry."
Like most freshmen, Luke spent much of the season warming the bench. Glimpses of Luke's potential had the local fans looking for big things. Unfortunately for head coach Gary Colson, he wasn't going to be there to see his recruit blossom. He didn't win enough games and he was sacked.
They hired Dave Bliss and he came down on a recruiting trip is what it was. And you know, he convinced me that the NBA was something that I could do, and that if I did come back that I would get the ball, get a chance to shoot the ball, and that he'd do everything he could to groom me for the league.
I often refer to Luc as a reluctant superstar because I think one of my first memories of him was the time that I realized it was time to put Luc into the starting lineup. We had an incumbent center, Rob Leffel, who as a 7-footer had played the last 3 years, but as a sophomore I knew Luc had these talents that we needed to start playing. I told Luc I was going to start him 2 games into the season, and Luc said, "No, coach," he said, "let Rob play. Rob's my friend and he needs to play and I'll help coming off the bench." And I told Luc right then, I said, "Luc, you just play and I'll be the coach."
Yeah, well, there was one game in particular where he caught the ball at the top of the key his freshman year, and he made one dribble move and dunked it left-handed over somebody. And then we went over to his house after the game, like, "You're going to be in the NBA, you're going to be a lottery pick." He goes, "Be quiet, you know, you damn American," or whatever he was doing. But I told him from that point on that you were going to go to the lottery. All you had to do was work. And he never believed me, and then about 2 years later, that's all he could think about because he knew it.
The Lobo fans had a new chant, and while the fresh-faced Australian was a little uncomfortable in the brightening public spotlight, his NBA dream was ignited. But to really appreciate how Australian basketball players got started on the NBA Holy Grail, you need to go back to when the rest of the world found out that we actually played the game. Australia's first international basketball competition was at the 1956 Melbourne Olympics, held at the exhibition buildings.
The United States had notable players like Casey Jones, Bill Russell, who went on to become career prominent players in the National Basketball Association in the United States. The 1956 Australian Olympic team was made up of a majority of former European migrants, and we finished 13th, was competitive without beating too many of the top teams.
And it was one of the sons of post-war migrants that was to become Australia's first genuine basketball superstar. Eddie Palabinskas from Canberra could have been an Australian football champ, but the gifted young sportsman got hooked on basketball.
I remember where the scout said, comment about certain players on the team, and said, "Watch number 7, he'll shoot from 15, he'll shoot from 20, he'll shoot from 30, he'll shoot from anywhere." Now he's talking about feet in those days, of course, and that literally was Eddie's case. No range was his limit, and he had absolutely no conscience, but he confounded everyone by putting the ball in the hole.
Palabinskas quickly found the game too small on the home front and managed to get an athletic scholarship to Louisiana State University. Only the opportunity to represent his country would bring Eddie back to Australia, and he was the standout player for Australia at the Munich Olympics. He missed by a single point on being the tournament top scorer. However, at Montreal in '76, the world saw the extraordinary shooting talents of Eddie Palabinskas in full flight as he led all scorers by a proverbial country mile, and Australia finished a credible 7th.
And put it in.
His picture-perfect jump shot was then lost to Australian basketball. Only a handful of the crowd would have realised just who he was and how good he was when he returned as coach of some touring pros.
Go ahead and do that, okay? But most of the time we're going to stay back and shut that down.
As you grow from year to year, you test yourself out and you see if there's a reality, you know. And of course, doing so well in the Olympics, I felt I could play with the best, and definitely I wanted to go in the NBA.
Drafted to Atlanta in the 4th round in 1974, Eddie never quite made the NBA grade, but he does share the honour of being the only Australian ever drafted, other than Luc.
His dad was holding him in his arms at Perry Lakes in Perth, and I said, Rick, I'm recruiting him now.
At 40, he still owns the perfect shot and is reckoned to be the best foul shooter on the planet. And the confidence hasn't dimmed a bit. When asked who would win a three-point shootout with Andrew Gaze,
I would.
Philippines for Australia.
Luc and Ed Palavinskas weren't the only Australians to make a big name for themselves in the cutthroat world of US college basketball. In front of over 60,000 rabid fans and a 100 million plus television audience, another Australian let the Americans know that Aussies could play a little.
It'll be Gaze again.
Oh! Gaze, simply the most famous name in Australian basketball. Even if a child prodigy named Andrew hadn't come along, Lindsay's exploits as a player and coach provide a virtual history of post-war basketball in Australia.
When I was growing up, I don't think I had the normal upbringing as for sport as what the average child would have because of my father's involvement in basketball. And when I was born, his occupation at the time, and still is, it was the general manager of the Victorian Basketball Association. And back then, as part of his responsibilities, was directly running the Albert Park basketball facility. And the manager's residence was directly attached to that facility. So right from birth, I had a 9-court basketball facility as my backyard. So, you know, I think that I grew up in very much an environment surrounded by basketball. And, you know, there hasn't really been I can't remember life without basketball because of that.
Andrew Gaze started playing for the senior national team at only 18. His arrival in the green and gold marks the start of Australia's climb into the elite of world basketball nations. About this time, another Australian basketball phenomenon, the fledgling National Basketball League, was also beginning to spread its wings. This was an era when Apollo in Adelaide and Perry Lakes in Perth were major spectator venues. It seems hard to believe that the hallowed Court 1 at Melbourne's Albert Park was a venue for NBL games until only a few years ago. The NBL changed all that. Hundreds turned to thousands and to 10,000. Basketball was suddenly a spectator sport. There was an invasion of talented American players, coaches and ideas, which propelled the league into an unprecedented period of growth in the early 80s. Corporate Australia also found basketball. Big business latched onto the family, non-violent appeal of the all-weather indoor game. Basketball was booming, and all that was needed was a homegrown superstar to ice the cake. Andrew Gaze had regularly produced the impossible for the Australian team, and when his club, the Melbourne Tigers, joined the NBL, the most valuable player in a league normally dominated by Americans was an Australian. To sample Gaze's brilliance, you only have to watch one game to witness a season's highlights. He is a scoring machine.
And now Gaze, that time clean as a whistle, commander of the game. Purchase into Gaze.
Oh, that's a long shot from Andrew.
Right, Gaze gets past a couple.
Oh, he becomes the third giant in double figures. Gaze!
Burgess robbed the ball. Comes to Gaze, a long three-pointer.
Gaze now probing, another three-pointer. Yes! Gaze, Tigers on a 6-point lead. Gaze with a three! Tigers now on a 9-point lead.
It used to be whispered as a, oh, that's Lindsay Gaze's son. Now, of course, it's the other way around. They say, oh, that's Andrew Gaze's dad.
Australian basketball really came of age in 1987 when sellout crowds in all cities flocked to see the Boomers go up against the mighty Soviet Union.
The game against the Soviet Union was something that I'll certainly remember because to a certain extent, I suppose it was the start of me being projected and given the profile which I have now.
Referee Davidov makes the call against the Soviets. And it's 5 seconds to go, and Australia down by 3. Look for the ball to go back to Gaze. Here it is. He's 1 for 3.
The hot hand of Andrew Gaze had given the Olympic gold medalists one hell of a fright before the Soviets won in overtime. The Gaze spectacular moved to the US college Seton Hall, where he joined a team that were ranked nowhere, and he took them all the way to the prestigious Final Four of the NCAA tournament. With Mum and Dad in the crowd, he was one of the stars of the semi-final romp.
To Ferry, and great defense on the inside. Gaze off the spin, gets it to Avent again. Gaze hoists a 3 from down under. It'll be Gaze again. Oh! Gaze is 3.
He's been waiting there, Brent, for what seemed like half a lifetime.
And while Gaze's team lost the final in overtime, he'd put himself under the noses of the NBA scouts. Yet, despite his outstanding form, Australia's most celebrated player wasn't even drafted. He trialled impressively with the Seattle Supersonics, but was last man cut.
Each year, there are literally thousands of people graduating from college ranks which are making themselves available for the NBA. Given that each NBA team will probably only bring in maybe 1, at the most 2 new players into their roster, there's probably only 20, just over 30 new people which come into the league each year. So, I mean, there was some story in some paper when I was over there that said that you have probably a better chance of winning the lottery than you have of actually, statistically, of making the NBA. So clearly it is very, very difficult. Luc Longley, he's the man. He's the man that you want to build your whole franchise around. 7'2", athletic, can run, very good understanding of the game, intelligent, extremely good passer, can shoot. What more do you want when you're 7'2"? I mean, that's something that your whole program can be built around.
While the NBA dream still burns for Andrew Gaze, a new generation of Australian stars were on the horizon. Luc Longley was just one of a trio of stars of the 90s that were to emerge from the Australian Institute of Sport.
Head up, Chris, hand position here. Finish it.
Adrian Hurley is the current national coach and head coach at the Institute.
You get to here, instead of catching and squaring, I want you to flare, take the long pass down here, Chris, and hit that shot from there. The story of Luc Longley, Mark Bradtke and Andrew Vlahov is a very interesting one, because they really, I knew of them and had heard of them, but they all came together in one place, and that was at Maroochydore for the National Under-18 Championships in 1985. And to see those three boys there at the One Championships, I think everyone knew that they were something special. And particularly Vlahov, because he was more mature perhaps at the time. Longley was just a very tall, skinny kid with a lot of potential, but he really wasn't an athlete.
And it was on the Vlahovs' family backyard court in South Perth that one of Australian basketball's most famous friendships was forged. Dream moves, impossible shots, last-second game winners, all played out in front of imaginary crowds. The Vlahovs are an extraordinary sporting family. Mother Eva was a state long jumper, and Len Vlahov held the WA discus record for 20 consecutive years. And all the Vlahov children have represented WA or Australia in different disciplines. Andrew first showed promise as a swimmer. Across town, the Longleys had their own sporting dynasty. Luke's uncle was a member of the Winning America's Cup crew, and his dad played league football and basketball for Australia.
He and Andy have been friends for a very, very long time, virtually since starting playing basketball. I played with his father for many years at state level and in the Perth Redbacks team. That family friendship has been there.
And some of the earliest memories we have is when the fathers and the sons would have an afternoon, Saturday afternoon session under the watchful eye of Ed Rogers down at Cannington Senior High School, and there were a number of fathers and a number of sons, and we used to have a bit of a scrimmage down there, so that was the beginnings of it. And Luke was pretty lanky and awkward, and while Andrew was a bit more solid and stronger at the time, it was always an interesting competition between them.
Yeah, well, I mean, it started with Luke and I. It goes way, way back. I don't know if he's told you the story or not, but when we were about, I think, 12 or 13, we were both playing on the same team, you know, for Perth Junior Club under Ed Rogers.
And I went up to say good day to Andrew, and I think it was me that said to him, I said, we better get to be mates because I figure we're going to spend a lot of time together.
So, you know, we've become great mates, and it's been true. We've been on state teams, you know, Australian junior team, the Olympic team, and, you know, unfortunately we didn't go to the same college, but, you know, we played on numerous teams together and always had a ball.
The fun started on the under-16 team, the first WA side to win any national basketball title. The Vlahovs then moved to Oregon while Len studied for his masters. Andrew was an outstanding recruit for a local high school. Despite breaking his foot during the state playoffs, Andrew attracted considerable attention from major colleges, and he eventually chose the prestigious academic institution, Stanford University. Unlike most freshmen, Vlahov made an immediate impact with his strong physical play and bullocking strength. An excellent defender, a clever passer. Vlahov was always prepared to put his body on the line for his team. During their American college summer vacations, Andrew and Luke would again join forces for their original club, the Perth, now Burswood, Redbacks. The dynamic duo would make mincemeat of the local state league.
Longley playing like a guard now. This is Vlahov. Back to Vlahov.
To play for Australia is, I think, one of the best things that's ever happened to me. It's played in the Olympics, you know, been to a world championship, and really, you know, it's a fantastic honour for me and something I'll never ever forget.
It was at the 1990 World Championships in Argentina that Vlahov began carving himself a reputation as a defensive stopper when he put the clamps on legendary Brazilian scoring machine Oscar Schmidt. Vlahov kept Schmidt to 15 points, scored 25 points himself, and Australia made it through to the top 8. Vlahov's final college season was interrupted by ankle surgery. Against the odds, he returned to be the MVP in the team's final game at the prestigious NIT tournament. Vlahov returned to Australia, signing a lucrative contract with an NBA out clause with the already powerful Perth Wildcats. He was an immediate hit with the locals, impressing with his physical play, but he raised a few eyebrows when he took up the offer to join the Los Angeles Lakers rookie camp in the middle of the local NBL season.
Probably all my life I've always thought, you know, there was where I was playing and then there was the NBA way up there somewhere. And, you know, it's hard to explain, but during the years that I've got better and better, I guess as a player, you know, I've bridged that gap. The thing about the NBA that's probably most noticeable is the degree of athleticism. It's another notch up from anything I've ever experienced before. And, you know, we're just getting warmed up, and the first play, you know, it's come down, and I get dunked on all of a sudden by some, you know, 6'9" black guy, and I'm like, geez, this is going to be a long 2 weeks.
Undrafted and undersized, Vlahov was always an NBA long shot, whereas his childhood mate Luke...
He's got that God-given ability that he's 7'2", and the fact that he's mobile, the fact that he's, you know, very intelligent and has a lot of court sense. And then I think what most teams like is his ability to pass a ball. You know, most centres in America, you know, they get thrown the balls, they know how to do is turn around and try and shoot or try and score. Luke has the ability to do that as well, but also to make everyone on the team a better player. So, you know, I think he'll turn out to be one of the great centres, you know, of the NBA, I believe.
Bounce around, he'll use it all. That's what it's up there for. There's McCrary.
NBA scouts. Mark Bradtke, a 6'10" juggernaut from Adelaide, was staking his own claim on the right to be Australia's first NBA player. Critics of the AIS were starting to eat humble pie as their basketball program featured Mark Bradtke, Andrew Vlahov, and of course Luc Longley, all in the one team.
And you always felt that Bradtke had all the ability because he had the balance, he had the athleticism, he had the coordination, and all he needed really was the skills and some good coaching. He was one of the best kids we've ever had to coach.
Mark Bradtke is one of the most athletic 6'10" guys around. And when he came here, it was like having a huge mould of plasticine to work with, and we all thought we'd be employed for many years moulding Mark because he had so much potential. It was just oozing out of him.
Unlike Gaze, Vlahov and Longley, Bradtke didn't take the US college option and developed his considerable skills in Australia. And what rare skills they are.
And so is that. Kenny Cole and myself saw Mark playing for Noarlunga in the State League, and he was a raw-boned kid, already nice and big and strong. And what we noticed is he had his athleticism at that young age for someone so big was very good. So he looked like a likely prospect even at that stage.
Unbelievably, Bradtke only took up the sport after watching it in the 1984 Olympics. By 1988, he was a member of that same team.
It's a great honour to play for your country. I played in the 88 Olympics, and that was a great honour, and I want to continue doing that.
Inside they go to Ortiz. Big block from Mark Bradtke.
Back in 88, they questioned Longley, Vlahov and myself for being selected in the Seoul Olympic team. So hopefully we've sort of answered the critics a little bit, but that's the way things go.
The largest crowd ever assembled for a basketball game in Australia came to pay homage to the world's greatest big man on his worldwide farewell tour. 15,000 turned out to see the Boomers up against legend Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. However, the Australian Twin Towers, Bradtke and Longley, weren't about to stand around in awe. Longley was impressive, intimidating the unstoppable skyhook and displaying agility and confidence at the offensive end. And Bradtke's monster dunk from a brilliant 1-2 routine with Longley was a series highlight. The Aussies wrapped up the series 2-1 in Brisbane. After all, there was also the amazing gaze for Kareem and his troopers to compete with. Australian basketball had come a long way. The 4th ranking at the Seoul Olympics was attributable to the fact that Australia now had genuinely talented big men in Longley and Bradtke. Now, Australia had lined up with 7-footers before, like Peter Grasshopper Walsh.
Right 'em, Cowboy.
And Andy Campbell. But with all due respect, these two were mainly just tall. The next generation of green and gold giants were athletes.
6 seconds to go as Bradtke turns and scores.
Despite impressing at NBA training camps with Portland and Detroit, Mark Bradtke passed on his final chance to bask in the bright lights of the NBA in 1991 when he chose to stay with the Adelaide 36ers. You might ask whether the loyal big man made the right decision. Bradtke and Vlahov had impressed at the 1990 Worlds, but the much-heralded Longley, who'd been considering going to the NBA early, performed abysmally.
My form, especially at the Goodwill Games and the early part of the World Championship, was, poor on a regular basis. And what it was, I think, was I was underprepared, basically. I was out of shape and hadn't been playing very much basketball. And because my mind had been on NBA. Do I go to the NBA? Don't I go to the NBA? I took basketball for granted that summer, and I paid the price.
Much to the relief of the entire Albuquerque community, Luke put all thoughts about leaving college early aside and set about finishing off his new-style NBA body and his Lobo career. Now that he'd finally stopped growing, the intensive weights program started to bear impressive results. And inspiration for Longley also came from an unexpected source. Bill Walton, the basketball great whom Luke was often compared to, was in Albuquerque as a TV commentator for a pre-season game. The 7-foot redhead is best remembered as perhaps the finest passing big man ever. If Walton wrote the book on big man passing, Luc Longley had definitely read it.
His potential is unlimited, I think. It's really just a factor of how hard he's willing to work and how much time he's willing to put in to get to the top. At high school, you have some players who are stars, some players developing when they're in college, some players who were terrible college players become phenomenal pro players. And I think his future is ahead of him.
Longley's early form was solid, if not spectacular, but his long-awaited matchup with 7'6" freshman phenom SHAWN Bradley brought out the best in Luc.
Well, Luc Longley, I'll tell you, I just have to mention you right off that he's a great person, and he and I got to be pretty good friends in the couple meetings that we had. As far as basketball skills goes, he's a great player, and the first time I played against him, well, our team won both times, but as far as the matchup between Luc and myself, I'd have to give him the win on that, because he basically dominated me, and he, because he's a good player. He's got a good head on his shoulders, and I think he's going to go a long way in the NBA.
Just saying hello and meeting him, we hadn't met each other, and there's got to be a certain amount of interest as far as meeting someone that shares the same traumas with being as large as we are, ceiling fans, doorways, that sort of thing.
The US national spotlight again fell on Luc as he became one of only a few Australians to be a subject in the American sporting public's Bible, Sports Illustrated. The edition featured photos with his mother Sue, who was now settled and remarried in Albuquerque. It was an instant sellout in town. The Longley career was in full flight.
One of the most important games for us last year wasn't the fact that we were in the NCAA. It was the game that got us into the NCAA. And this was a game against our arch rival, UTEP. But Luc played a very extraordinary game, got 20-some points in the game. But the most important points, we had the last shot of the game. We went down, layup was deflected. He just kind of grabbed the rebound and showed his uncanny ability to shoot the ball from all sides and distances, and nailed about a 15-footer on a turnaround. One of the endearing scenes that a coach can see is all the teammates mob one player and kind of grab him in such ecstasy, and that was the scene with ROB-ROBBINS just hugging right up next to Luc.
In final analysis, he'd become the Lobos' all-time leading point scorer, rebounder and shot blocker. More important to Luc was that he had won the respect of his teammates and the local fans and NBA scouts.
The NBA selection process these days is so in-depth and so calculated that anybody that gets there, no one gets there by accident anymore, by circumstance. You really get there by, on your own merits. And so I think as much as I'm going to be able to pioneer that for Australia, I'm not really going to be blazing a path for anyone, because the path is just as tough for every single person who gets there. Right now, it's a little bit like, I don't know if you've ever been trapped in a confined space and had an itch. It's an itch that you can't scratch. Like having an itch in the bottom of your shoe, on the sole of your foot. It's a frustration, you can't scratch it. It's difficult to explain, it's anticipation. It sits right just below your sternum and makes it hard to communicate.
Luc was one of the exclusive few invited to the Big Apple for the NBA draft.
He brings to the table something you look for in centers. And let me preface that by saying that you get a center once every 20.5 years. He can run the court. He shoots a hook shot, which is the only unstoppable shot in basketball. He's a great passer. He can bring the ball up the floor. He may be the best passing big man to come in the NBA in 10 years.
With the first pick in the 1991 NBA draft, the Charlotte Hornets select Larry Johnson.
And with this announcement, Larry Johnson became #1 in the country where it matters most. His salary for 6 years, $20 million. For #2, Kenny Anderson, a whippet-like guard with exquisite ball skills, it meant never having to work again. #3 was an agile 6'9" swingman, Billy Owens. 4th was a native of Zaire, the African giant Dikembe Mutombo. It was getting to be sweaty palms time for Luc. A pair of Smiths, Steve and Doug, went 5 and 6, and then...
With the 7th pick in the Minnesota Timberwolves, select Luc Longley from the University of New Mexico.
From the instant that David Stern mentioned his name, Longley became NBA property. All Minnesota had to agree on was a final price. And with the NBA cap came a hefty responsibility. First up, a national television interview, Then 2 hours of non-stop questioning,
We'll be playing with Australia whenever possible.
followed by instant Timberwolves publicity shots. And a phone hookup back to Minneapolis where a mere 4,000 people were attending a draft party. For girlfriend Kelly and family, there was barely time to taste the champagne. The Timberwolves public relations machine had Luc whipped off to Minneapolis for a press conference the next morning.
I'd like to introduce Luc Longley.
Now, it wasn't going to be all milk and honey for Luc. Many of the local fans had booed when the team had selected another 7-footer. After all, they already had two, and this one, an Australian, had actually been known to have an opinion on something other than basketball. No longer the skinny young kid who pronounced to the Albuquerque press that he was lazy, Luc was in total control. Minnesota was a pro sports town. When the weather is as bad as it is for most of the year, you tend to find things to do indoors. With 4 major pro sports teams, basketball was not the only show in town. Despite this, and the fact that Minnesota has only had an NBA franchise for 3 seasons, they'd already set the record for the highest aggregate season attendance. And while they might be new chums in the NBA ranks, the Wolves were hungry for success.
He hits the 3, alley-oop, blasted it! That was from Scotty Brooks!
But there was one little thing keeping Luc from joining his new team: money. While the agents and the owners sat down to haggle, Luc went into hiding in the mountains around Albuquerque to contemplate his newfound wealth.
Yeah, I've had a few little splurges. I've been on a couple of extravagant holidays. I've bought my mother a nice car. I've done that kind of thing, but I think my aim with the money that they're going to pay me is to set myself up for the future. I'm not going to deprive myself of very much. I'm going to live well, but I'm not going to live high on the hog. I think I'm going to make some pretty conservative investments, put my money in the right places so that when basketball's finished, I can do things that I want to do.
I always just described Luc as a romantist. When you spoke to Luc about what he wanted to do in life, he'd want to own a farm by the sea where he could ride horses and sail yachts, and he also wanted to be a great basketball player. And we used to often laugh about how all the different ways that Luc was going to make all this possible. And if he earns all the money he's going to, he's probably going to do all of those things. So perhaps I was the romantic and he wasn't.
But I think just by playing against better competition, the NBA guys every day, just about practicing against them, playing against them, spend more time on my body, keep healthier, better aerobic conditioning, all that sort of stuff will just, basketball's a game of increments, of millions and millions of little increments, and just to keep accruing those, and I'll accrue them at a faster rate in the NBA, and I think that's what it's going to take, is to play, for me to get better, I have to play in the NBA, basically is what I'm saying.
So as the contract dispute dragged on, Luc was putting the finishing touches on his NBA chassis.
It's been my experience in working with college athletes, in particular basketball players, that Luc is far and above the worker that most of them are. And I don't mean to take away from any of them, but I don't see any of them get up at 6 in the morning to work out like Luc and I have for the last 4 or 5 years. I mean, you just don't see it very often.
Again, take 2, and into the gun, Dan.
Score 2 for Lobos, mate. Call now.
And the contract negotiations dragged on and on. Luc filled in time doing local TV advertisements, while the Timberwolves were into pre-season against none other than the world champion Chicago Bulls. The Timberwolves copped a hiding, and trade rumours started to circulate. The Timberwolves president, Bob Stein, had this to say.
We don't have Luc playing. He doesn't begin his career and takes a big step backwards in his career. But I like to think that that doesn't make much sense. And if he's getting that kind of advice, I don't think he's getting good advice. It's like someone who wins an $8 million lottery and is advised by his attorney not to take the money unless they'll pay your taxes too.
Finally, the impasse was broken. A month into the season, and Minnesota's record of 2-9 was as bleak as the local weather. The Timberwolves immediately put Longley on the suspended list. giving them 2 weeks to whip him into shape. Longley was finally and officially a Timberwolf, and with his annual salary estimated at 1.6 million US came an enormous responsibility. The pressure is only just beginning. As he prepares for his first game, the local and Australian media will put every move under the microscope. Everyone has advice and opinions. Fans will scream if he misses a shot, just as they will be the first to crow and cheer a classy move with a slick assist. But this is all part of the job. Luc has made a career from defusing detractors.
Minnesota, and here comes Luc Longley, the Australian, out of the University of New Mexico, and the first-round draft pick.
And as he scores his first historic NBA basket, those with wiser heads understand that Minnesota's investment is in the future, and that Longley's potential, as with most young giants, will slowly blossom in the NBA.
Glass, he'll bring it down to Longley, goes in for a stop. And Minnesota has their biggest lead of the night.
6:30 tomorrow night. It's live football action here on GWN when we present the big clash between the West Coast Eagles and North Melbourne from the MCG. Coming up next, though, great laughs with Fast Forward. Then we visit Barcelona with Steve Vizard.
Next on